Welkom, je luistert naar Business Radio van op FTI SuperNova in de Waagnatie in Antwerpen. Ik ben Tom van der Velpen en mijn studiogast vandaag is Clark Scheffy. Clark Scheffy is partner bij IDEO, het gerenommeerde wereldwijde ontwerpbureau dat design thinking populair maakte en tot in de directiekamer bracht. Van het ontwerpen van de eerste muis voor Apple tot de Ford F-150 Lightning en het ontwerp van de in-flight service voor Lufthansa. De kans is groot dat je al in contact kwam met iets waar IDEO een rol in speelde. Clark, welcome.
Hello.
How's SuperNova been for you this far?
Good so far. Yeah, really exciting to see this many people here and all the energy of the event. It's been great.
Well, Clark, let's talk creativity. And I've got a bit of a bold question for you to start off with. Can creativity save the world?
Great question. Probably not by itself, but I think it's an essential ingredient in sort of how we approach everything. Creativity is the act of imagining the future in many ways. And if we do not imagine the future in which the world is saved, I don't think we will save it. So maybe it is essential.
Do you feel that creativity is under pressure right now in these modern times, for instance, with the rise of AI?
I do. AI is maybe a separate question. I was going to answer your question slightly differently, which is I think just generally with the pressure of the economy and post-COVID and the sort of proliferation of ways that we can surface data, there's a very sort of data-driven, optimization-driven approach to business, and I think that's a threat to innovation, actually. That's one place I think where I would say creativity is more under threat is sort of obsessive analytical approaches to problem solving rather than exploratory what might the future be approaches to problem solving.
I've also heard certain people saying, well, you know, data is also an enabler. It enables creativity as well because you're better informed. But do you tend to disagree with that?
I wouldn't say I agree or disagree. I think it's dangerous when we say data is the answer. I think data is a measure of what is happening. That doesn't necessarily mean we're asking the right questions or asking ourselves, well, what could be and are we measuring the right things? So too often I see businesses will have a measure that they, you know, let's say they consider it a KPI and it's going in a direction they don't like. So they do very simple things like just apply sort of pressures, some kind of penalty to encourage the KPI to go up or some kind of incentive, whatever it is, to drive customer behavior in a certain way so that the KPI reflects the targets they have as a company. That doesn't necessarily solve the problem. It just sort of, in the end, can really piss off your customer, actually. So I just think we need to be careful about seeing data as the answer rather than just a measure and actually asking the question underneath it of what is driving that behavior that we actually can solve, or where's the opportunity in that data to actually provide a new experience or to innovate for our customer.
I love the way you remind us that we have to stay vigilant for that and also that we have to keep asking questions, huh? Because that's what you're saying. To return to the subject of AI, as I can imagine, that must put some kind of pressure on you as well as a creative, or would you rather see AI as an enabler on that level?
I would definitely rather see it as an enabler. I would say any creative who is not already playing with AI and trying to understand it is missing an opportunity. I do think there's a lot of interesting things it offers. I think a lot of the creative output at the moment is a little bit of a parlor trick, and it doesn't mean it's not going to get better. It's getting better every day, so you have to engage with it. Also, I think there's been some interesting research out there, even in the short time that AI has been relatively accessible, which is just that suggesting that it definitely raises the floor on creativity. It hasn't demonstrably raised the ceiling, which is to say, if you're a mediocre designer, AI is catching up to you very, very quickly. If you're a very good designer, it might be good to have AI on your team, but it's not exactly a threat to you, but you do want to be including it on your team. And I think it can give even the best designers or creatives a big step up. You can just get a lot of early ideas out quickly in partnership with AI. And I tend to think of AI as a collaborator, not as a threat.
Can we make this for a moment very specific for
Yeah.
you personally as a designer. Can you explain to me how you use AI, or with an example?
Yeah, sure. I even used AI to get an outline together for my presentation today. I just had a lot of ideas I was working through, a lot of things I'd written down in sort of sketch format. We have an instance of ChatGPT that's walled for just our firm. So the content that goes in there is not shared publicly. It doesn't go to teaching the model externally. I was able to feed in all my notes, all my scatterbrained ideas, and just said, like, take this and give me a 30-minute outline for a presentation. Now, what it gave back was not what I showed on stage, but there was a couple of instances there. It's like, oh, that's interesting. I didn't see that theme in there. That makes me think this. Again, like as a collaborator, it gave me a reaction to what I was thinking that I could then build off of. So yeah, I used it a couple weeks ago.
Fantastic. Now that I know that AI is a collaborator on your team,
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, working at IDEO, I imagine it to be a dream for many people.
Yeah.
But what does one need to get hired by IDEO? If I already know that AI is hired, what do I need to do to get hired?
Yeah, AI is not hired yet. It's not replacing anybody, I wouldn't say. But we're in a consulting design organization, so need to really have two things. One is the ability, good consulting skills, which I think is the ability to listen and really understand, have empathy for our clients, and also, frankly, be able to describe your process, really talk about how you are going through your creative process. It can't be magic where you go away, come back with the answer, because people are paying you for that, and you need to bring them along.
Yeah.
And then you just need to have really great skills. I think we hire the best designers in the world. So there's still just no substitute for experience and the ability to execute your craft at the highest level.
Yeah, I can imagine that. Reading your website, I'm seeing that you're speaking about, IDEO designs products, services, experiences. These are three very different things that require, I'd say, very different skill sets. How do you keep up as a company? How do you go about that?
Yeah, so I'd say, if you looked at IDEO, let's say 20, 25 years ago, you would have found only a few disciplines there, really, mostly design research, a lot of mechanical engineering, some electrical engineering, and then industrial design. We were doing a lot of physical products. Our portfolio of work has changed over the years. As you mentioned earlier, we've done in-flight service for Lufthansa. So we do a lot of service design, a lot of financial service, digital and physical service design, spaces, experiences, you name it. So in that journey, we've also expanded the number of disciplines, writing, filmmaking, graphic design, storytelling. We even have food designers on staff for work we do in the food and beverage space. And so the number of things we can do is expanded, but of course you can't bring, 30 people onto a team for a project that's, only 6 or 8 weeks. That's just chaos. So one thing that I think works for us is we have a very open culture of collaboration that allows people to come in, and we also have a strong design process that people understand when they're coming into a certain part of the project. They kind of know how to fit in. And then with our culture, that's just very, I call it post-ego. People don't have a big sense of ownership of their ideas. It's not like they're holding them tight. They just freely given out. Well, let's say you have a need to design some small piece of the food that's served. We could bring in a food designer for 4 hours and they would kind of understand, okay, you're here in the project, and they could contribute right away. They can just sort of pick up pace quickly, give their ideas, and then the rest of the team can take them. And there's sort of no problem with that. It's just freely given. And I don't know that every creative organization has that. I have yet to see it. I think a lot of other places there's more ownership and in a negative way, and that keeps people from sharing and building and collaborating the way we do. So that's kind of how I think we make that work, and how we've still managed to have such a diverse portfolio of work and still be successful in so many different kinds of pursuits.
I heard you mention the word culture. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. How did you end up with such a great culture? Is there a way for companies to sort of co-create that culture, or is it out of your hands? What would you say about that?
Yeah, culture is not by mistake. I mean, I think part of it comes from our founder, David Kelly, and just the kind of vision he had and how he shows up. That's a big piece of it.
What's his secret?
I don't know. It's just kind of the person he is. He's always been very generous. All of our founders have been just sort of very generous with their time. One of the principles IDEO has is make others successful. Not a lot of organizations truly believe that. A lot of organizations might say it, but in our world, actually, if I can make other designers around me better, that's better for the whole business. We don't have any individualized incentive systems that would give me any reason to make myself better over someone else, if that makes sense. It's like, It's all about raising the tide. So that's one piece in our culture. And I think most organizations are actually one is individual success is often at the expense of others. And so that doesn't encourage that. We have a very opposite model.
Yeah, and amazing that actually you're succeeding in that.
It sounds a little utopian, and sometimes I guess it is, but I don't know. It's worked. I've been there a long time, so.
Yeah, I believe you. Well, just related to that, and as a final question, before we take a little break, on your website, I'm reading that your design is always human-centered. It's not customer-centric; it's human-centric. Is that a deliberate wording?
It is. The distinction really, I think customer is a bit of an abstraction, and I will meet clients who will say, well, we're designing for our customer, and they've never actually interacted with those people. They don't know who they are, or they've got an idea in their head, but they're not actually engaging in real ways. So when we say human-centered, we actually mean spending time with people and treating people as people, not as a customer or something a metric, a sort of a source of revenue, but actually let's understand their needs and their lives. Also understand that our job is to, help clients innovate and design those new product, services, and experiences. We're a little upstream of making those people customers just yet. I actually want to find out what needs they have in their world and how we might design those experiences that they're interested in. If they're really interested, then they become a customer. And then we can start to measure them and charge them money for the thing, whatever it is. But I think there's a little bit of an important nuance in that.
For me, it stays a little bit abstract, Clark, if you don't mind, but I hear so many companies speaking about customer centricity at the moment. There's a lot of talk about sustainability, the environment. Feels a little bit like a trend word as well, human-centric design. But I'm sure you disagree with me.
I think it is trendy. I still think it's evergreen and important. I think at the end of the day, you want to save the planet, you're going to have to save the people. I mean, we need to understand what's driving people's behavior. That's a human-centered problem. If we can understand that, I think we can also do things like save the planet, be responsible socially, etc.
Yeah.
And I actually think when you're just trying to drive customers, let's say driving customer acquisition at all costs, we see plenty of evidence that can be both destructive to the planet and destructive to people's lives in some cases. So I still believe in it. I understand how words get trendy and maybe misused, but I still believe in it.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to believe that as well. And I think that's a very, very valuable insight as well for many business owners. So thank you very much for this first part. Let's take a quick break and we'll be back right after the break. Thank you.
Business Radio, live from FTI SuperNova. Life's a venture.
Welkom terug hier op SuperNova voor het tweede deel van het interview met Clark Scheffy. Wij spreken hier over creativiteit en ook toepasbare creativiteit voor iedereen die op dit moment luistert. So Clark, let me start with a very important question for all of us. Creativity. How does one go about? How does one become more creative? Chris Martin once said, creativity is like a wave that hits you. So in terms of surfing, you have to catch the wave. Do you agree?
So let me draw a distinction between what I do as a designer and what Chris Martin does as an artist. And Chris Martin's obviously excellent musician, songwriter. No one can deny his success. But I think an artist, that makes sense. My job as a designer is actually I have to be creative all the time. Clients pay me to come up with ideas and to be creative at the drop of a hat. I can't wait for the wave. I have to create the wave. So how I do that, I mean, stay curious, keep making things, sketch, draw, think, write, whatever, just produce work. It doesn't always have to be good. I'm not always trying to be right. I'm just trying to keep making things and keep asking questions, staying curious, trying to solve things. So it's just a constant process, I would say. And then stay inspired. It's part of my job, I think, as a leader of a creative organization. Part of my job is to make sure my teams are inspired, which means I have to be. That has to come from somewhere. And that can be everything from, reading, listening to good podcasts, going to the museum, doing things that are uncomfortable, get you out of your normal behaviors, challenge the way you think about the world, all of that. So I think, very important to keep sort of outside influences coming in and challenging yourself. That I think fuels the creative process.
Yeah, when talking about the creative process, sometimes artists tend to call it also the creative flow, and then they want to get into the flow. Some of them even have rituals or a fetish almost to get into that flow. Do you have a particular ritual to get into that flow?
I mean, I love being in conversation with my fellow designers. That's probably the thing that works for me the best. I wouldn't say there's a ritual or a flow, but I am not a solo artist. I'm a team player. I love being in a group of people and bouncing ideas off one another and sketching. That's really where I feel like flow happens. That might be very different for a lot of musical artists or painters that work in a very solo environment. Design for me is very much a team sport, and I think in the right flow as a group, that's where the magic is for me, is where ideas are going between people, not just from one person.
How do you put teams together and create the right team for that?
Yeah, that's always a mix. I mean, I have a few themes I use, at least when I'm putting together a team for a client. I like to find the right mix of experience and, I guess I call it enthusiasm or learning. Actually looking at somebody who's done something 10 times before may not be where you get the most interesting energy. You may want someone who is new to something. So mixing that up on a team is where I think you get the most sort of energy. And as I mentioned in the earlier segment, that principle of make others successful, I'm always also looking for how I'm growing others through exposure to more senior people, because that just keeps raising the bar. That's kind of how I think about teams. And then of course I have people that I work with better or not. So I have my go-tos, folks that I'll say hey, I got this idea. What do you think? Sort of your go-to thought partners.
I've missed your keynote on the main stage. The title of the keynote was Human, Messy, and Not Yet Real. Do you mind sharing one key takeaway with our listeners?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the center of my talk is really that in order to be innovative, there's a few things you need to allow for in your culture and the spaces and your approach to leadership. And really the talk is about helping people embrace those aspects of creative leadership. I don't think there's a lot taught in business or management today around how to be a creative leader. There's a lot about managing to known metrics and sort of architectural forms of management, let's say. But how do you actually let organically good things emerge in an organization? How do you allow for the mess of innovation where probably you're going to have 100 failures before you have a success, or you're going to have a lot of dead ends on the way to where you're trying to go? Those qualities in leadership are really the center of my talk today, and just trying to help the leaders in the room sort of take some of those skills into their practice and hopefully incorporate them.
And is it hard to incorporate it? Can anyone learn it?
I think anyone can learn it, but I think there's a lot of headwinds, and you need to be really thoughtful about it. So I think it's like any practice. I think you can learn it, but I think you need to be disciplined about it, and probably remind yourself every day and ask yourself, okay, how might I do this differently? How might I support people who are trying new things and not just push them back into doing the old things?
Yeah, that's always a challenge. And also, you already mentioned it, but you're talking about failure as well. Have we as entrepreneurs forgotten how to fail maybe? Because it's not very trendy to fail, right?
No, well, interestingly, I guess entrepreneurs, most of the entrepreneurs I meet will speak openly about their failures because they're probably on their, fifth or 10th company and the first ones were failures. I love those stories. I think they're very informative. They're very sort of like, they're like in those stories are the lessons of people who learned something from that failure, got back up and tried it again. And I think the true entrepreneurs they've all got those stories. More what my talk was talking about established companies where they now have the pressure to succeed all the time. So they've got a successful product in market. If they've got investors or heaven forbid they're a public company, then suddenly everybody's looking at them and they're like, all you're allowed to do is more of that success. And then how do you create the space to actually innovate, which we know has failure involved? How do you create the space to do that? And how do you lead teams? How do you structure incentives? How do you build a culture that supports that when the stock market or your investor, everybody else is just expecting profits every quarter? You got to carve out space for that and you got to lead for it. It needs to be intentional.
Yeah, because to make it specific, how do you carve out that space? And there's also the space to allow for failure, I guess.
Yeah, I think there's different ways to do it. Many companies set up a kind of innovation organization internally that can work. I didn't go into it in too much detail today, but many of our most successful clients have sort of different groups doing innovation at different phases of kind of the path from, let's say, early insight or consumer insights to in-market successful products. That can be intentional. And then where those internal organizations live within the main organization, how they're interfaced with the rest of the organization is another challenge, because you don't want it to be so separate that it's like the cool kids. You want to allow exposure, but you also want to give them some air cover so that they can do their thing without having to sort of show results all the time when the results might be up. We tried 100 things, none of them worked, but we think this one still has promise,
That's so hugely interesting, and also such a huge challenges for so many organizations. Building a culture of innovation, I suppose it requires a certain mindset of a company, because it can be challenging, I guess.
Yeah, it requires a mindset. And then I think there's also, building a culture is an interesting question, because cultures aren't built so much as I think they're nurtured. And again, part of my talk today was sort of about how to do that. One of the ways we think is sort of, we call gardening, not architecture. So how do you nurture that? So rather than thinking of your organization architecturally as you would an org chart, actually think about the things that nurture people's creativity. So what spaces are you creating in the space where people can gather and collaborate? And I've seen great examples and bad examples. I've seen the bad examples of like the innovation room that's empty, but it might have a cool, it has a whiteboard and some toys and whatever interesting color paint, but still nobody's using it. Like, that's a question. Why is that not working? And then I've seen really good spaces where some of the best real estate in an office building, instead of being the CEO's corner office, that's actually the place with the most light and plants, is where everybody can gather, and there's nice coffee and people actually want to spend time there and they're sharing ideas. You can do things like establish rituals that encourage creative, innovative behavior. So is there a meeting once a week where people are required to share new ideas or bring a prototype or share what they're excited about, share a bit of inspiration for the week on a challenge that the company's working on? And then just for leaders to lead with questions as often as they lead with answers. Yeah, sometimes a leader needs to be a strong and directive and say, hey, everybody, I need us to focus on this. We have an issue that I know we can solve if we all put our attention to it. But sometimes if we're asking, like, where's this company going in the future, a really well-phrased question that activates everybody into sort of exploring a new territory, then that can be the way to lead. And I talked about that today as well. So those are just sort of three things that you can think about as a leader to sort of create that culture. And every culture is going to be different, but I think these are some of the behaviors that then over time, maybe that you can start to get that culture to emerge. And the one last thing I'd say to people who are thinking about this is be patient but also measure it. Culture doesn't happen overnight. It's not a structural change. So it's not easy to say like, oh, okay, by the end of this week, we're going to have the culture I want. It's probably not going to work that way. Instead, try to imagine, really take notes about what it's like today and then look back, month by month, what's changed? What do you see people doing differently? And imagine in 18 months, can you look back and see that there was a change? That's the change for that's the sort of span of time for cultural change, I think, is about that 18-month time frame. And it's something I'm asking constantly is like, what organization do I want to be in 18 months? And what things do I need to change today that can enable that to happen?
So pregnancy is 9 months, change exactly. 18 months,
right?
2 pregnancies, right?
Yeah, well, if you're a human, I suppose. Isn't Wales somewhere like in the 18 month? I don't know exactly. It might be in the 18-month range.
Thank you so much, because these are very practical recommendations.
I hope so.
Yeah,
I hope listeners can actually kind of imagine how to implement some of it, even just from this short time together.
Yeah, sure. And just one last final question, because we've been talking about creativity. You're one of the leading voices when it comes to creativity. Is there one book in particular you could recommend to our listeners that you feel is worth reading?
Not a very original one right now, but Rick Rubin's book. I mean, it's beautiful. People probably know he was the producer for the Beastie Boys, among many other incredible acts. Johnny Cash's last records. Anyway, his book, A Creative Act, A Way of Being. It's quite poetic. It's not sort of a beginner's how-to on creativity. It's really going on a journey with one of the most innovative creative minds, certainly in music, and kind of a way of looking at the world. So I found it very inspiring. And again, it's more you go on a journey with him. It's not sort of like instruction, but it's beautiful.
Did you read it in one go, or is it?
No. I sort of have dipped in and out of it. It to me doesn't require end-to-end reading. It's something you can kind of go into, and it'll change your perspective. And then,
I'm reading it right now. I find it quite deep, but also very empowering indeed, and very inspirational.
Yes.
Just like you were today. Thank you so much for joining us today here on Business Radio Vlaanderen on SuperNova. It's been absolutely amazing talking to you, and I'm wishing you loads and loads of luck creating and designing many, many beautiful things. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks so much.